If this feels like something you've always wanted to understand, hit subscribe before your brain convinces you to wait. Here's a question I need you to sit with before we go any further. Not answer, just sit with. Have you ever been absolutely certain about something, completely sure, only to find out later that you were wrong the entire time? And not just a little wrong, totally, completely, confidently wrong. Because here's what nobody tells you about that feeling of certainty. It's not coming from the truth. It's coming from a story your brain already decided to tell you, before you had all the facts, before you even had half the facts. And the scariest part? Your brain didn't wait for your permission. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside your head right now, because there's something working in you at this very moment that most people never even realize exists. Psychologists call it System 1 and System 2. Think of them like two completely different voices in your mind. One is fast, automatic. It reacts before you think. It jumps to conclusions before you blink. That's System 1. And then there's the other one, slower, more deliberate, the kind of thinking you do when you're solving a hard math problem. That's System 2. Now here's the thing that changes everything. Most people walk around believing they are System 2, the rational one, the thinker, the one making conscious, careful decisions. But that's the illusion, because in reality, System 1 is the author of most of what you think, feel, decide, and believe. And it's been writing the story long before System 2 ever showed up. Right now, researchers in cognitive psychology have mapped out exactly how this happens, and what they've found is both fascinating and a little unsettling, because what your brain does, automatically, instantly, without asking you, is it builds the most coherent story it can out of whatever information is available in the moment. Not the most accurate story, the most coherent one. There's a massive difference. Think about the last time you looked at someone's face and instantly felt like you knew what they were thinking. You didn't analyze it. You didn't reason through it step by step. You just knew, or at least it felt that way. That's System 1 doing what it does best. It looked at a single signal, a raised eyebrow, a tight jaw, a slight narrowing of the eyes, and in less than a second, it handed you a complete narrative. She's angry. He's hiding something. They don't like me. And here's where it gets wild. Your System 2, the slow, rational one, mostly just nods along, because the story felt coherent, and coherence feels like truth. There's a principle behind all of this. Researchers describe it with a phrase, "What you see is all there is." Let me say that again. What you see is all there is. Your brain doesn't know what it doesn't know. It can't factor in the information that's missing, the evidence it never had access to. So what does it do? It takes whatever's available, builds the most convincing story it can, and presents it to you like a done deal. No asterisks, no fine print. No, but wait, we don't have the full picture. Just certainty. And that certainty? It's not a feature of finding the truth. It's a feature of the story sounding good. This is the secret your brain has been keeping from you. And once you see it, really see it, you can't unsee it. Stay with me, because it gets deeper. You know that feeling when you hear a story about someone's success and it all just makes sense. Like, of course they succeeded. They were smart. They worked hard. They made the right calls at the right times. It all fits together perfectly. That feeling of course. That's not wisdom, that's your brain getting tricked by one of its own best tricks. Here's what cognitive researchers call the narrative fallacy. Your mind is constantly, obsessively, trying to make sense of the world, and to do that, it builds stories. Stories that are simple, stories that are concrete, stories that put talent and intention and personal choices at the center, and quietly push things like luck and chance and randomness off to the edges where they can't be seen. Think about the Google story for a second. 2 graduate students at Stanford, a brilliant idea, a series of great decisions, a company that becomes one of the most valuable on the planet. The way that story gets told, it sounds almost inevitable, like it was always going to happen, like there was a clear line from point A to point Z, and all they had to do was walk it. But here's the truth nobody includes in the story. There was a moment, early on, when those same founders were ready to sell the whole thing for less than $1 million, and the buyer said the price was too high. That moment, that almost decision that could have ended everything, we mention it briefly, and then we move on, because it doesn't fit the story. And your brain doesn't like things that don't fit the story. What your mind does, and it does this constantly, is it edits. It takes the messy, complicated, luck-filled reality of how things actually happened, and it reorganizes it into something that flows. Something with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Something with a clear reason why the winner won and the loser lost. Researchers call the result an illusion of understanding. You feel like you understand what happened. You feel like you've learned something you could apply to your own life, but what you've actually done is consume a very convincing piece of fiction, because the story left out the 900 versions of events where things went differently, where the luck didn't land, where the phone call came a week too late or a week too early. Your mind can't process all of those non-events or all the things that could have happened but didn't, so it just doesn't include them. And what you're left with is a picture that's clean and clear and completely misleading. Here's where it gets even more personal. Have you ever looked back on a decision, something that went wrong, and thought, I should have known? That feeling, that I should have seen it coming feeling. That's not insight. That's something psychologists call hindsight bias. And it's one of the most common and most quietly damaging things your brain does to you. Once you know how something turned out, your brain immediately rewrites its own memory of how much you knew beforehand. You didn't see it coming. But now your brain is absolutely convinced that some part of you did. And the worst part of hindsight bias isn't that it makes you feel bad about a past mistake. It's that it makes the world seem more predictable than it is. And a world that seems more predictable makes you more confident the next time around, even when you shouldn't be. Detail number 2, mid-video after delivering value. If this is hitting different right now, drop a comment. Tell me, what's one thing you were 100% sure about that turned out to be completely wrong? So why does your brain do all of this? Why would the mind build stories that feel true but aren't always accurate? Why would it choose coherence over completeness? Because coherence is faster. Think about it. You're walking down a street at night. A shadow moves in your peripheral vision. Your brain doesn't have time to do a full analysis, to weigh the probability of danger, gather more data, run a logical assessment. It decides in a fraction of a second, and that decision is built on pattern recognition, not precision. That's System 1 doing exactly what it evolved to do, protect you by being fast, not perfectly accurate, fast. The problem is, we're no longer just navigating dark streets and unknown predators. We're making financial decisions, career decisions, relationship decisions. We're judging people's character, evaluating which information to trust, deciding what's real in a world that's more complex than any nervous system was designed to handle. And System 1 is still out there, moving at the speed of instinct, building stories and handing them to us like sealed envelopes we never open. There's something called the halo effect that plays directly into this. Here's how it works. You meet someone, and in the first few seconds you pick up one strong signal. Maybe they're incredibly confident, maybe they're warm and funny, maybe they're just really attractive. And here's what happens next. Without your permission, your brain takes that single strong signal and uses it to fill in everything else. Suddenly, that confident person is also probably competent, probably trustworthy, probably good at their job. The warm, funny person, probably honest, probably reliable. The attractive person, probably smarter than average. None of that is logical. None of it follows from the evidence, but it feels like it does, because the brain doesn't like incomplete pictures. It fills in the gaps automatically, and it fills them in with whatever is consistent with the story it's already telling. This is why a company's CEO can be described as visionary and decisive when the company's doing well. And then, a year later, when things go sideways, those same behaviors get described as reckless and inflexible. The person didn't change. The story changed. And the brain rewrote the character to fit the new narrative. Here's a real question I want you to sit with. How many of your strongest beliefs about someone close to you, a partner, a friend, a co-worker, were formed in the first few interactions? And how much has everything that happened since then been filtered through the lens of that first impression? Because here's what the research actually shows. We don't update our first impressions with new evidence. We filter new evidence through our first impressions. That's a completely different thing. It means you're not gathering information about someone. You're gathering confirmation. And the story keeps getting more coherent, more convincing, more true, even if it's been wrong from the beginning. But there's another layer to this, and it might be the most surprising one. There's actually something called cognitive ease, a kind of mental comfort that your brain produces when information comes in smoothly, when things feel familiar, when the story doesn't need too much work to make sense. And here's the strange part. That ease feels like truth. When something reads easily, sounds familiar, or comes in a form you recognize, your brain gives it a small gold star of believability. Not because it checked the facts, because it flowed. Researchers have even shown that if you see a statement in clean, bold, high-contrast type, you're more likely to believe it's true than if you read the exact same statement in a fuzzy, hard-to-read font. The content didn't change, not a single word, but the ease changed. And ease gets mistaken for accuracy. Repetition works the same way. Hear something enough times, even something that isn't true, and it starts to feel familiar, and familiar starts to feel like real. That's not a glitch. That's just how the machine runs. Okay, so your brain builds stories from incomplete information. It rewrites the past to match the present. It fills in gaps with whatever fits. It confuses smooth and familiar with true. Now what? Because here's the thing, and I don't want you to miss this, knowing about these patterns doesn't automatically fix them. Your System 1 doesn't suddenly start asking for more evidence just because you've been told it should. It keeps doing what it does. But here's what can change. Your System 2, the slower, more deliberate part of your mind, can learn to recognize the signals, the moments when a story feels too clean, too neat, too satisfying. Those are the moments worth pausing on, because real life isn't clean. Real decisions don't come with perfect narratives, and when something wraps up with a beautiful bow, there's a decent chance your brain wrote that bow in after the fact. There's a concept researchers talk about called the two selves. The experiencing self, the version of you living through each moment in real time, and the remembering self, the version of you that looks back and decides what the story was. Here's what's wild. These two selves don't always agree. They don't even always want the same things. Your experiencing self might go through something difficult, genuinely hard, moment by moment. But if the ending is meaningful, if the final chapter lands well, your remembering self will look back on the whole thing and call it worth it. And if the ending is disappointing, even an experience that was mostly good can get rewritten as something darker. What this means is that the story you tell yourself about your own life isn't a recording, it's an edit. A carefully curated, emotionally weighted, narrative-shaped edit of events that were far messier, far more random, and far more dependent on luck than the version you carry around in your head. And here's where I want to bring this all the way home, because this isn't just about cognitive psychology. It's not just about research findings and thought experiments. This is about the voice inside your head that tells you why things happened the way they did. The voice that says, I knew this relationship was going to fail. I always felt something was off. The voice that says, of course they got that promotion. They always knew the right people. The voice that says, that's just the kind of person they are. That voice is not reporting reality. That voice is building a case, and it builds its cases fast and confidently, and long before it has all the evidence. Researchers refer to this as a mind that is, quote, radically insensitive to both the quality and the quantity of information that generates impressions and intuitions. What that means in plain English is this. Your brain doesn't care how much you actually know, it cares how good the story sounds. And maybe the deepest truth in all of this is something that takes a second to really land. The reason your brain creates false explanations and believes them isn't because you're irrational. It isn't because you're gullible. It isn't because something is broken in you. It's because your brain was built for speed and survival, not for truth. It was built to navigate, to predict, to decide fast, and for thousands of years that worked. A coherent story was better than no story. A quick answer was better than a slow one. But now you live in a world where your quick answers get recorded and shared and built upon, where the stories you tell yourself about other people shape how you treat them, where the narratives you use to explain the past determine what risks you take in the future. And the machine running all of that, it's still moving at the speed of instinct. So the real question, and this is the one I want to leave you with, isn't whether your brain creates false explanations. It does. Mine does. Everyone's does. The real question is, are you willing to slow down long enough to ask whether the story you're carrying is actually true? Or is it just the most coherent one your brain could build from the information it had? Because somewhere right now, there's a version of you that already has an answer to that question locked in, certain, confident, completely sure. And somewhere behind that certainty, a story is quietly running. If this opens something up for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and I'll see you in the next one.